Sanbonani, Namaste, Namaskar, Vanakam, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom. Good evening to all my comrades, friends, and the wider community in the Tongat area, and I'm sure there are many from other parts of the greater Durban area here today to celebrate once again, and perhaps more importantly, remember the life of Comrade Billy Nair. A life as a trade unionist, as a Congressite, as a Communist Party leader, as an MK leader, as a UDF leader, and above all as a friend, a comrade, and an associate who was known to all of us for his immense courage, for his principled character, for his principled approach to politics in very different times from the 1940s right up to his passing away. And it's a memory worth recalling. It's a set of character traits that are worth remembering. And I want to congratulate Kola, Selvan, and others for once again putting this event together. I must also very sincerely apologize for not being with you in person. I explained to several people that I have very sensitive sinuses, and the last few weeks have been hectic trying to get a budget going which South Africans will find acceptable, but secondly that will inspire some confidence in our economy at a time when many people think that there is gloom and doom. Of course, we also had other events like politically motivated charges against Opa Makashula, Ivan Pillay, and myself. So today, that part of the secret is out as well. And there have yet been other events also. But my main point here is my sincere apologies to all of the organizers, to the family, and to comrades in Tongat for not being able to be with you. I hope that what I have to share with you today will be sufficiently thought-provoking on the one hand, and as a contribution to this very important memorial. I also want to greet ANC, SACP, and COSATU leaders that might be in the audience. I want to pay my respects to all the veterans and stalwarts who are there. I believe Comrade Ahmed Kathrada would be there as well. So Comrade Kathy, my apologies to you, and Comrade Swami, amongst others. And greetings, ladies and gentlemen, to all of you. Thank you very much for this privilege of being with you at a time when certainly South Africa seems to be going through both very difficult political and economic challenges, let alone social challenges, where issues of race and non-racialism still appear prominently on our maps. But let me go back to Comrade Billy Nair. I first met him when he came out at Durban Central Prison. Many of you might be too young to remember where Durban Central Prison is or was. It's where the conventions it's where the convention center is today. And he was welcomed by his lovely wife, Elsie, and went to a flat that they've had in the Warwick Avenue area, and so started with myself, but with hundreds and thousands of other activists throughout the country, a relationship in terms of comradeship, in terms of revolutionary practice, in terms of learning revolutionary theory, and above all, learning how to organize masses around those revolutionary principles of the African National Congress and the Congress Alliance, so that we can begin to further enhance the downfall of apartheid. He was an incredible comrade who had a wonderful command of history, a wonderful sense of humor that all of you would be familiar with, a keen political and ideological analysis, and simple tools that would enable all of us to understand at any point in time what is going on in this world. What are the forces at play? And where do we fit in, either as ordinary citizens or as activists? What is our role, and how do we play that role? And people like him and many others, Kanikan Lovu included, Archie Gumede, and many other activists, played a remarkable role. But the thing that stood out, I think, for many of us who worked closely with him, was that he was a resilient person. You would never ever find him gloomy. He was always optimistic. He always inspired to do the next best thing. But above all, as you heard and probably saw during the Vula detentions or the prior ones, he was completely principled and uncompromising with the enemy. He never let his side down, like so many other comrades in our ranks have done so proudly as Congressites. He knew where the line was drawn, and he knew what was right, and he knew what was wrong. But more importantly, he knew, because that is what his culture, political culture, taught him, that what is right needs to be stood up for, and what is wrong needs to be fought against. Whether, as I quoted in my budget speech, and as Amilcar Cabral says, whether that's an external problem to our movement or whether it's an internal problem to our movement. Many of you would have enjoyed his sense of analysis. He'll take 100 different facts, and you'll wonder now, is this old guy meandering away somewhere? And yet, 5 minutes later, he'll bring those 100 facts together in a very astute analysis of either the economy or the politics or the goings-on of the world. Billy Nair was also not a romantic. Whilst the ideals of the Freedom Charter and the ideals of our democratic struggle were clear, later the ideals of the Constitution were clear, he also understood that there would always be, in any human endeavor, negative dynamics. And he would warn against opportunists. He would warn against the people's struggle being hijacked for personal interests and for interests other than those that serve the masses. And today, like in many other countries, that is an objective phenomenon that we have to take into account. And those of you that have been very active in recent times, and correctly so, and I must commend you for that, will want to link some of your experiences and observations now to the things that Munna used to warn us about, and as many of you know, we referred to him as Munna. What would he think about today's world? He'll say this big word called globalization, where everybody is supposed to be wearing American footwear or American designer wear or European designer wear, or where money can flow in literally a millisecond to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions, anywhere in the world, depending where the so-called investor wants to take it, or where 24-hour news channels put out all sorts of news that reach from one corner of the world to another in a very short period of time, amongst other phenomena. He'll be worried about this globalization. On the one side, there's pluses in terms of trade, in terms of economic development, in terms of spread of technology, in terms of spread of production in different parts of the world. But on the other hand, what we are now realizing is that even in the developed world, globalization is leaving millions and millions of people behind. What's happening as a result, which Munna would have pointed out, is that there's a gap between the elites, the middle class, and the poor. That the elites are creaming away much of what growth produces in many of the countries, less so in the developing countries, but we know that inequality in South Africa, in Brazil, in many other developing countries is just as bad. And this phenomenon of inequality is equally concerning. The second thing that is happening as a result of this is that there is a trust deficit developing. In other words, people on the ground don't trust, and many surveys show this, banking CEOs, business leaders, government leaders, sometimes even civil servants as well, because essentially they're saying, you are doing things to benefit yourself. You are not doing things to benefit us. And partly it's a globalization phenomenon, partly it's a homegrown phenomenon as well. The third thing is that what we're learning in recent times, we used to put politics in one pot, and we used to put economics and society in another pot. Today, what is very clear is that what happens politically influences what happens economically. And what happens economically influences the quality and dignity of life that the vast majority of South Africans enjoy. This is the case of South Africa, it also applies all over the world today. In other words, political formations, political dynamics, political choices actually decide whether investment takes place in a particular form in a particular place, and whether that investment actually creates jobs for our youth, creates training for our young 6 million people who are out in the streets, whether it puts more money into the pockets of the poor and gives them more job opportunities, or whether the money we spend from the fiscus, the money that we give to housing, to education, to water, and the state-owned enterprises. Where is that money spent, and who benefits from that money, is the question that today we are being asked. So if you come to our own country, firstly, rounding up where the world is, it's not in a happy place. There's a lot of uncertainty, there are a lot of dynamics that need to be sorted out, and bottom line, the global system is not working for the majority of the people. Something different needs to be done to change the global scenario. Ourselves, we're familiar with our own situation. Inequality, poverty, unemployment are the primary challenges. Secondly, our institutions in health, in education, and elsewhere have done well to deliver. We need to do better as we go forward. Why? Because we have to make sure that the progress that we've made over the last 20 years is not lost, but more importantly, our own people want us as government, and indeed as civil society as well, to deliver with a greater sense of urgency and a greater sense of dedication to what they want, not what we think we want. But importantly, citizens have woken up now. They can see right through every one of us. They know what motivates each of us, broadly speaking. Their vigilance has been sharpened, and they know when things are being done for them and with them, or also know when things are being taken away from them. Every single cent, every single rand, that is from the 1.4 trillion rands we spend this year as government, that is meant for the people or for salaries or whatever, that is taken out of the system, is taking away food from the mouths of children, is taking away the next house, is taking away the next water connection, is taking away the next sanitation connection, is taking away the ability to have a road connecting a little village to a main road so that people can go and sell whatever they grow. And I can go on. Every cent taken out of the system affects the poor. It affects the rising middle class. It affects inclusive transformation, because we are not including our own people in the processes that we can include them, let alone what needs to be done in the wider system to encourage inclusive transformation in every sector of our economy and country. So comrades and friends, over the next 10 years, 5 years, we have a huge challenge ahead of us. And the challenge is to ensure that the gains of the first 22 years are not pushed back. The challenge is to make sure that the kind of direction that the National Development Plan, the ANC's constitution, the country's constitution, and the Bill of Rights in the constitution are actually achieved. That's the task that we have. The question is, in a very complex kind of environment, how do we actually make sure that we deliver? Now, delivery happens through organization. It happens through institutions. The state has various institutions apart from its three arms: the legislature, the judiciary, and the administration, or the executive. And the executive has its administration. So each of these have their institutions. The executive and administration have institutions that are actually supposed to do the work that they are supposed to do. The question I think all of you are asking today, and many brave South Africans are asking, Are all of our institutions doing what they're supposed to do? Are they really serving the national interest? Is all of the billions of rands they have to spend actually going to the poor and the lower middle classes so that millions of people can lead a better life in the next, say, 2 or 3 years, so that our children can be trained, so that those who are poor and cannot afford it have their university fees paid? Or is that money going elsewhere? Sometimes in bags all over the show, as we hear from certain people. So the work that we have to do as government, as civil society, as activists of the movement, is to sharpen our focus and ask ourselves the question, in this kind of context where we've made huge progress, we probably made the best progress in the world since the Marshall Plan in Europe after World War II. But the question is how you advance this process at a time when there might well be other issues and other agendas at play. So Munna would say to you what he learned in his Marxist classes and say, hey, read Lenin. Lenin asked the question, what is to be done at a particular point in time? So let us all ask ourselves, A, what is to be done? And some of it you've done already in the context of issues that have arisen. And before I go too far, I also want to thank all of you on behalf of Ivan and Opa for the kind of support that you've given us personally and our families, but more importantly to the principle that the law must not be abused for political purposes. That's a very important principle, and that our constitutional values must be upheld. So Munna would say to you the following: our goals remain the same. Nothing has changed. We must still continue to make sure that we attain full democracy for all South Africans. We must still make sure that any form of any injustice must be eliminated. He would say that the kind of social contract, if you like, because the Constitution was a deal, if you like, but a deal to progress our democracy, that compact in our Constitution must be enhanced, and that the work of his generation and generations before should be on our conscience all the time. It should never leave our conscience, even if we dislike to sit and watch TV at home. Let the conscience work, because conscience is an important driver of making sure that each of us does the right thing, and we'll all make mistakes because we're human, but more importantly, that when the right time comes, we stand up for the right things as well. The Congress movement has people of great diversity in it, people who come from different communities, languages, races, etc. But the key thing that our political forefathers achieved at all times in the struggle was unity, and that theme I'll come back to. And Billy Nair was a key proponent of unity in our ranks and ways of finding the kind of middle point where we could actually work together. So our goal, Freedom Charter, the Constitution, the rule of law, and the principles in the ANC Constitution. We should all take out the objectives clause of the ANC Constitution, make a copy of it and keep it in our top pockets or wherever. Read it every day. It still tells us what's the right thing to do in terms of non-racialism, in terms of unity, in terms of transforming the economy and continuing with our struggle. The second is principles must once again trump or overcome careerism and opportunism. It's a tough fight. Every movement in the world has had that fight. Every political party will have that fight. The fellows who wear other color shirts, who think they have better principles than the ANC, themselves have these fights. So, given the legacy we have as the ANC, we must reinstate the ANC principles of non-racialism, of democracy, of non-sexism, of development. Otherwise, other people are going to take that. And don't allow careerism. Careerism means I want to join because I want to become the next councillor, and then I'll do anything in order to do that. Careerism destroys movements. Reports of the President, reports of the Secretary General at various meetings of the NEC have pointed this out. But as communities and as activists, we need to take that on as our responsibility. Third, work in the national interest and work in the people's interest, not for oneself. Of course, if you're a civil servant, you have to work for yourself because you're going to get paid at the end of the month. Now, we're not saying everybody who's there who's a civil servant must now give up their salaries. We've got about enough money to pay you for this year and next year, so you can actually relax. But the main point is distinguish between personal issues and your friends' issues and what is in the national interest at this point in time and what will benefit the general people. The fourth point arises from my first point, globalization and the financialization of our economy. And part of the outcome of this is a simple 5-letter word called greed. I think it's 5 letters, G-R-E-E-D, just in case I'm forgetting. Greed has become the biggest driver globally of this insatiable means unsatisfiable need for more money and more money and more money. Once somebody has stolen R1 million through a tender or from a firm, or a business person has done a deal with a civil servant, the next instinct is to add 2 more zeros after it, then a few more after it. That's the disease that is undermining us today. We've got to watch greed, we've got to fight greed, we've got to expose greed, because greed is against the national interest. Fifth, he would say, have a unity of purpose. Come together, learn the lessons of our past, understand what it means to actually find compromises that will ensure that we can all benefit from the way things are happening and that this country actually works for us. The fourth, there are lessons from Billy Nair's life for leaders. And those lessons will be about transcending petty issues, always looking at the big strategic issues that will advance our country. It's about being courageous at the right times. Look at his life and what he's been through and what he symbolizes. In jail for 20 years, in detention again, in the underground. He flew into and out of the country. He didn't even tell us, many of us, what he was doing in the late 1980s. He went to Parliament. He was part of the Standing Committee on Finance in Parliament, as long as his body could manage. And in all of these roles, he was meticulously courageous and frank about what was right, but also about what was wrong. He was able to constantly, throughout his life, ensure, as we must do, and you must do as activist leaders, never forget the welfare of the majority. But most importantly, all of us need a gut instinct about injustice. That's what he had. An injustice is an injustice. And an injustice must be fought. It must be exposed. And those responsible must be held to account. Otherwise, we will have a very different kind of South Africa. But Billy Nair's life exposed this for us to see, to follow, to emulate, and to learn from. As South Africans, whether you come from a rural area or urban area, from one province or another province, from one language group or another, we all have one country. We are one people who have one set of objectives. And that's what he would ask us to work with. He was a formidable non-racialist, as I pointed out, and somebody who would not tolerate racism in any kind of form. And yet another lesson for us to learn from him. Human solidarity and social justice mattered to him. It now matters to us. Because you see, we can have money being dished around, but we're not necessarily promoting social justice. Social justice is where there's fairness, there's dignity, and there's progress in the life, in every aspect of life, for all South Africans. Yes, it's an ideal, but it's an ideal still worth pursuing. It's an ideal that we need to continue. And as far as the Congress movement is concerned, in the broadest possible sense, one of the great achievements of Billy Nair's generation, and generations before that, and some after that as well, has been the ability to create maximum unity around common issues. Common issues, I agree, in 1955, were different from 1975, different from 1985, and very different in 2016. But what are those common issues? And he would say to you, try and find a way of working together. But he would also say, value ethical leadership, where integrity is beyond reproach. And maybe you want to have a discussion at the end of this meeting. You know, in the old days, we would break up into groups and then have a little chat and report back. So I'm not sure the organizers would allow that. But some of the UDF methods that we used can be used again today because they're very valuable. Let's talk about what does ethical leadership mean and what does integrity mean. It is the same ethics and integrity that Billy Nair would say is required to be more deeply permeated or more deeply embedded in the public servants today. We have about 1.6 million public servants in municipalities, provinces, and national government. Probably a little bit more if you include SOEs. Are they all inspired to serve the national interest? Do they all understand the Constitution? Do they understand these values of integrity and so on that we are actually talking about? Those will be some of the challenges that we need to take on. Let me begin to round up by saying that there's a few issues I want to address, and then I'll conclude. The first is that, and before I do, one of the important points to connect with the rest I've said is Billy's commitment to non-racialism and non-sexism. And the one thing about Billy Nair, Kanikan Lovu, Achikume Ade, and many other comrades is that they were totally incorruptible. Whether in a 20-year prison cell, whether in detention under the old security branch, whether harassed by that security branch, or whether they were approached with somebody who had a bag with 600,000 rands. They would be totally uncompromising. And all I want to say is, I don't know how many of them we still have around, but I know we do have them around. And to those who said, like my deputy minister, Klavisi Jonas, you can keep your bag, I want to keep my integrity. We, you and ourselves, must pay a huge commendation to people like that. In the process of trying to protect our integrity, there's all sorts of mud being slung around. So imagine, look at your neighbor as you're watching this. Now it's your neighbor who has taken somebody else's pen from their pocket without that person knowing. You saw it and you're accusing him. But he'll say, but you also took something from the next guy. But that's not the issue. The issue is that pen doesn't belong to you. Give it back. You shouldn't have taken it in the first place. So you now have this justification exercise. And one of the warnings that history gives us is that this kind of justification eventually leads to impunity. Impunity means I don't care. I don't care who gets hurt. I don't care if poor people get hurt. I don't care if this money is not spent for poor people. As long as I get it, that's fine. That is not in the spirit of our Constitution or the Freedom Charter or the ANC Constitution. Our faith community, this morning, I heard, has announced that an idea of the equivalent of a TRC and some kind of amnesty. Come and own up. If you put it in very crude terms, come and own up how much you've stolen. And let's find a way of actually solving this problem. There's the other question, and I'm sorry I have to get a bit personal here about myself, which I rarely do. There's this talk about how I was appointed or asked to be appointed or asked to take this job on the 13th of December 2015 after the Nene Gate event. cabinet positions are not applied for. I was asked to a meeting with the President, and I was asked whether I would take this job. Now, the conversation between him and me for now will remain there, but as I understand it, it's ANC leaders who decided on a name, and I was approached to take this job. This nonsense that's going on about monopoly capital and so on is just that, it's nonsense. In my position, anybody in this position, if they are to serve the national interest, will have to work with the poorest and the not so poorest in this country, in order that the poorest benefit. And we must be clear about that. None of this nonsense that's going around is going to cover up for the fact that not all of us are working in the national interest. And I've always been of the belief, a lesson I learned from Munna and cadres like him, but him in particular, and there are few that are sitting in the audience, that the people will always catch up with you, he said. You can go wiggling around as much as you like. The people will catch up with you because they understand what the truth is at any given point. So we serve in the Treasury, all of us, to serve the nation and make recommendations and take actions which are consistent with that. And clearly, there are people who are unhappy with that. They are unhappy because the laws require us to ask some questions if you say you're initiating a big project. But that sort of gets in the way. And at least there's some information available now which gives you an understanding of the kind of challenges that we actually have. Last 2 or 3 points. The first is that our own movement, the ANC, doesn't belong to a few people. Like a soccer team that you know, it belongs to the people. Starting in 1912 and probably going on way beyond our own ages, this movement is a people's movement. Its inspiration, its strength, its moral guidance, and its political principles have always been informed, sometimes in a small scale, sometimes on a big scale, sometimes in a contentious way, sometimes in a consensual way, but always informed by the people's interests. We should not allow this movement to be weakened now. We should not allow this movement, in fact, let me put it the other way. Ours is the task to ensure that we strengthen our movement, that it is around for decades to come to serve South Africa better. And if we want to do that, then we must be frank with ourselves, that there are challenges that we have, as the ANC statement says yesterday on the Capture report. There are challenges we have. When you have a challenge, look in the mirror and ask yourself, like all of you do, is my tie straight? Is my dress right? Is my dot right? Is my necklace right? Have I got the right colors matching before you go off to work or wherever? Let's look in the mirror and ask ourselves, is everything right? And if it isn't, let's get on with the job of putting it right. Billy Nair would say to us, guys, get back to the job of creating unity in your ranks. Get back to understanding what is your core purpose as the African National Congress. But whatever our differences, you see, surely we all agree, whichever so-called side or avenue we come from, except those who are specialists in greed, we can easily find 90% agreement in the ANC. We want inclusive transformation in our country that benefits the masses. We want our democracy to work in accordance with the Constitution. We want the objectives of the ANC Constitution to be worked towards and achieved. We want to serve our people as faithfully and as fairly and as diligently as we can. We must agree corruption is bad. How we deal with it we'll come back to. But let us all agree corruption is bad. It's a cancer. It will destroy us. It is destroying us. Not completely. We can fight it. We must agree that we need maximum unity in the ANC. and with other progressive forces, so that we can do the things we need to do to produce a great country. We must all agree that anybody who's offered 600 million or 600,000 must refuse it. That's part of being a person of integrity. We want to do what we have to do on our own steam, for our own country, for our own people, not with bags in our hands. And above all, let us introduce the kind of ethics that Muna would have asked for from all of us. My second last point is to commend all of you for this memorial and for the activism that we've seen recently, and in particular the wonderful role that our ANC stalwarts have been playing all over the country. They are Billy Nair's generation. They are reminding us of the core values of the ANC. They are reminding us who and what is the ANC. They are reminding us that the ANC must be put back on its track, on its historical track, inclusively, so that we take everybody on board and create that maximum unity that we are actually talking about. So to end, many of you who've interacted with Muna, his first remark to you sometime when you complain to him, he says, "Don't worry, be happy." Some of you will be old enough to know the song. And he would repeat that refrain and keep you going. One of my colleagues had the opportunity some years ago, a group of them, while I was still at SARS, to sit with Muna for an hour or so. And she remembered two things about him. He said, if you love something, protect it with your life. And in this case, whether it's the public service or whether it's institutions of the public service, protect it with your life. Good advice. And also, sometimes, Muna said to them, in order to do so, you need some tough love. And it's that mixture that Billy Nair had at a marvelous level for him. He would also tell us that leaders today need to be bold, they need to give moral leadership, they need to give political leadership, but more importantly, they need to embed themselves in the people's cause, because that is what the ANC is all about. We need to re-inject the values of integrity, of good ethics, and of honesty in our ranks. There are a lot of people who are good, probably the vast majority, in the country and in the ANC, who are good people, who have good intentions, who want the country to serve all of us and want a better country for all South Africans. So Muna and Billy Nair, as some of you would know him, would say to us, right guys, let's get on. Go ahead and make sure that you understand and work for social justice. Make sure that you make our democratic institutions work. Make our wonderful constitution and rule of law a reality every single day for South Africans, regardless of where they come from. Above all, serve the poor, serve the working class, give the middle class new opportunities so that they can drive the economy and create jobs. But the middle classes of our country must also ensure that their orientation, like middle classes of the past, particularly for the next 10-15 years, are also committed to ensuring that they serve both their own family needs, but also contribute, as many of them do, to broader family and community needs as well. So it is a time for tough choices, but it's a time where we can do great things for this country and ensure that we leave behind a better South Africa. So as he would say, don't worry, be happy, and in being happy, be active, and in being active, make sure that you continue to contribute as you did in the past and have you've been doing recently to a better South Africa. So thank you, Kia Leboha, Ngi Bonga, Nkosi, Ngia Toga, Danki, and thank you very much once again for this opportunity, and more importantly, my apologies for not being there with you. Goodbye.